Hey, deserving listeners, I thought I would answer some patron emails. This email is from an anonymous patron. She says, "Thank you so much for everything. You are always my favorite podcast, and it has helped me so much. As an adult who has had OCD since early childhood, your confirmations of just how severe OCD is have always been so validating to me when few people understand." Yeah, just chiming in. Yeah, well, as a person who suffers from anxiety and OCD-like traits, I have a personal interest in people understanding how horrible it is and to stop using OCD as a descriptor of people that are tidy. Going on with your email, you say, "Listening to your recent episode on pedophilia OCD, I have some questions. The best way to determine the type of OCD you have is to ask yourself what scares you the most. If you're most afraid of being shamed to your community and or your religion, or you're most afraid of going to hell, you might lean towards scrupulosity OCD. Just chiming in. Yeah, people often obsess on the type of OCD that you have, and they can look quite different, but the core features are identical, or at least very, very similar. You know, it's similar when people have all these different names for different kinds of phobias, which I find to be kind of silly because we can just use specific phobia and then say, and my specific phobia manifests in worries about germs or worries about having to pee in public, or my worry is on claustrophobia and that sort of thing. Anyway, going on. If you're most afraid of being, so an honest patron is just like, if you want to know what kind of OCD you have, just ask yourself what scares you the most. And some people worry about going to hell. Some people worry about being a pedophile. Some people worry about contamination. So then you say, most folks with OCD have had several types in their lifetime. So a good way to check if someone has pedophilia-themed OCD versus actual pedophilia is if they've had obsessive and compulsive behaviors in the past. Is that something you've noticed as well as a clinician and as an academic? Just chiming in. Yeah, and that is something that I do think about and will use in assessment. And if I didn't talk about it in the pedophilia-themed OCD episode, I probably should have, in that people who have pedophilia-themed OCD, if they have legit OCD, in all likelihood, they have had other obsessions or related kinds of anxieties, and it's just currently manifesting in pedophilia-themed worries, you know? Whereas someone who is actually a pedophile might not show other OCD types, right? Now, could someone have both? Could someone suffer from pedophilic disorder and have OCD? Yeah, absolutely. Could someone who suffers from pedophilic disorder be terrified of being a pedophile because they have empathy? Yeah, also true. So, you know, and I went into the nuances on that and said, I believe in the episode that it's hard to tell sometimes. You can ask a lot of questions and you can get a very honest set of responses from a client and still not necessarily know. You kind of have to wait for time to play out and treatment to progress. But anyway, going on with the email. Also, how do you feel about OCD being removed from the anxiety disorders chapter and into its own category in the DSM-V? It rings true to me personally because it emphasizes the huge differences between OCD and other disorders, as being grouped with historically. But what do you think? I'd love to know. Thank you again. End of email. End of email. Well, thank you, anonymous patron, for that set of questions. It is a good one, this last one. Yeah, I understand why OCD. So if you don't know, in the DSM in the past, OCD was in the anxiety disorder chapter. And then in DSM-V, published in 2013, it was put in its own chapter of, I can't remember the exact title, but it is basically like obsessive compulsive disorders and other related disorders. They have like trichotillomania, hair pulling compulsion disorders, and body dysmorphia. I think hoarding disorders in there too. Things that are more compulsive in nature. And on one hand, I completely understand, and I agree with the justification to have it in its own chapter, because it is quite different in a lot of ways than generalized anxiety or panic disorder or those kinds of classic anxiety disorders. Having said that, I have a hard time adjusting because I grew up with it being in the same chapter, and there's a reason why they were in the same chapters, because they share a lot of qualities. Like for myself, who suffers from various different kinds of anxiety, in line with what you're saying, Anonymous Patron, and I think I talked about this, if you suffer from anxiety generally, you often have kind of a whack-a-mole experience like I have, where your anxiety will manifest in claustrophobia, and then in health anxiety, and then in some mild OCD or full-blown OCD or germ phobia or social anxiety or panic. It tends to either spread or just crop up in different ways. And for me, being a clinician and going to therapy and doing therapy on myself, I've managed to whack-a-mole a lot of these down, but then it crops up somewhere else. But each time I do it, it gets better. It gets easier to whack the next version. And I, generally speaking, have had a lot of non-anxious years over the past, 10 years or so. So to me, and I think for a lot of clients, OCD and generalized anxiety and phobias and the treatment of these issues are all in the same camp. Having said that, for some people with OCD, hoarding disorder, this kind of thing, it can be very different from anxiety in that the person just has kind of either the anxiety is denied in their conscious mind, or it's not really experienced as anxiety the way that I might experience anxiety when they have OCD or when they have hoarding disorder or something. It just feels more like an itch that they have to itch, almost like an addiction. And OCD can definitely present like that, where they don't feel anxious, but it's just this overwhelming desire to do a certain thing, to count the tiles or to flip the light switch on and off. Now, as I've talked about in previous episodes, often there's a tremendous amount of anxiety that's driving the obsession. If I don't count all the tiles, something bad will happen. There's just this sense of doom. So sometimes I wonder if people who report and frame OCD as not having actual anxiety at times, I wonder if those individuals just aren't very aware of the anxiety, or they frame it differently. They frame it as an itch rather than terror. And, when we talk about this kind of anxiety, it's kind of weird, right? Because if you're not actually afraid of, say, getting a disease, but you have this thought in your mind, like you must turn the lights on 3 times before you can move on with your day, is that anxiety? Is it distress? Because the person often isn't specifically worried about a particular outcome. Some people are. Some people will, like I had a client that literally would not step on a crack because he thought that if he stepped on a crack, he would break his mother's back, like the childhood saying goes. He thought not necessarily that he'd break his mama's back, but that something bad would happen to his mom. He consciously knew that that was ridiculous, but what if, And he obsessed on looking down whenever he was outside and would never step on a crack, that kind of stuff. So is that... So sometimes it is anxiety, and it's very known to people. But anyway, so overall, whatever, DSM. But honestly, if I had it my way, OCD would still be in the anxiety disorders, and maybe just expanding it a little bit, like anxiety and compulsive disorders or something in that chapter, because OCD is hard enough to understand for clinicians that don't have anxiety or OCD. And to have it in its own category, I see some clinicians, some novice clinicians, thinking of OCD more as a compulsion rather than an anxiety-driven obsession that results in compulsion. But I don't know, if it was in the anxiety chapter, would that increase people's ability to understand it? Who knows? All right, let's take a break. All right, we're back from the break. So I wanted to do an OPP patron shout out to those patrons who have the letter L in their name. And we have Lily from Eugene, Oregon, who has been a patron since 2015, which I think October 4th, 2015 specifically. And I think I started Patreon in September, so Lily would be one of the very first people. In fact, I think I know Lily. I think, Lily, you go by a different name and you came to one of our live events. And then we have Liz, Liz from, I think Liz was from the Midwest and also joined in 2015 and also came to an event, I believe, if you're the same Liz. And we have Lewis from Rochester Hills, Michigan, and also 2015. And we have Leanne from God Knows Where since 2015. We have Noah from God Knows Where 2016. We have Leanne from Spruce Pine, Alabama, 2017. I wonder how many Alabama people we have. That doesn't usually come up. Karen from Hong Kong, 2017. Thank you so much. We have Lexi from New York, 2017. Lindsay from Bellevue, Washington, just near Seattle, 2017. Bellevue is where Stacy grew up, which is just near Issaquah, which is where I grew up. Linda from Sequim, Washington, good old Sequim, the Banana Belt, as they call it, 2016. If you watch 90 Day Fiancé, that's where, what were their names? Was it Natalie? Remember the guy that lived in the middle of the woods and the woman from Ukraine? Anyway, that's near, I think that was Sequim, right? And Kat from Taylorsville, Georgia, 2017. Jill, good old Jill from Falmouth, Maine. I think we named Jill in a different OPP. Liz, good old Liz from Indianapolis. Lara, I always get that wrong, from Parma in Italy, 2017. TR, good old TR from Seattle, good old Seattle. So thank you so much to you all for having an L in your name and being a patron for so long. I mean, 10 years for some of y'all, which, I could not do this without you throughout the years. I mean, and please stay a patron because I want to do this longer. Let's go on to an email. This email is from an anonymous listener. She says, I fired my previous therapist for crossing some boundaries with me. I'm sorry that happened, anonymous listener. And when I started therapy with my current therapist, I told him that one of my goals in therapy is to heal from the trauma my previous therapist caused me. And he was really helping me. Okay, well, I'm an anonymous listener. I'm glad that you gave therapy another shot going on. But about 1.5 years ago, there was a weird moment where it seemed like he was looking at my breasts. And I felt like there was this weird tension between us, which made me really uncomfortable. I convinced myself that I was making it up and that I was just being paranoid. But recently, we talked about that moment, and he pretty much told me that although he's trying not to bring his feelings into our therapy, sometimes I can notice them, and it doesn't have to mean that I'm being paranoid. He said he's not saying he has feelings for me, but also he's not saying that he doesn't have feelings for me. When we talked about it later, he sort of implicitly said that he did look at me the way I thought that he did. Just chiming in here. Yikes. Going on. After my previous therapist, I decided to choose another male therapist because I wanted to repair the relational trauma I had towards men, which is also connected to me being abused as a child. Okay, so just chiming in here. You had a therapist that crossed boundaries and harmed you. That was a man. And then you chose another therapist because you're a strong person and thought, well, I need to do some repair from the previous therapist and from men in my childhood, or a man in my childhood. And so that was a brave move. And then you have this second therapist that is also having some trouble here going on. But now I'm not sure if the current situation is helping me to repair it or is it making it worse. But I know my current therapist wouldn't cross the same boundaries that my previous therapist did, so maybe the experience of him not harming me, even though he might have some feelings, can be helpful for my recovery. I'm not asking for advice on what to do, but would be interested in your thoughts on this type of situation. End of email. Yeah, well, a lot of possibilities. One is that you're completely safe and that, yes, this is maybe the perfect sort of therapeutic scenario for you to recover because he is maybe having some level of countertransference or feelings toward you, but will never act on it because he cares and is a good person who can handle himself, and that would be the perfect thing to repair. Like if you had a woman therapist who never had these kind of feelings towards you, maybe it wouldn't give you an example of someone that resembles your past but acts in a different way, and so it wouldn't have the sort of corrective experience punch that this would. On the other hand, and to stay in that camp of optimism, there are a lot of therapists out there, I wouldn't say it's the majority, but a good number of them, that adhere to the philosophy that you should never create a crazy-making situation for your client, in that if you have some kind of feeling, which is normal and fine, for a therapist to have physical attraction to a client is human, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I would never shame a therapist for having it. You can't help it. It just happens. And for some therapists, they adhere to the philosophy that to deny that would actually be harming the client because the client will be picking up on it subconsciously, and to create a double bind or a crazy-making situation where you deny it can really screw with a client's head. And it's argued that if you actually confirm that what they're picking up on is accurate, you're actually reinforcing their judgment, right? You're saying you are a good judge of character. You are reading things right, and I don't want to essentially gaslight you by acting like it's not happening. So that's one philosophy. I don't adhere to that philosophy in this situation personally, but I'd stand by someone that did. I personally think that if you're going to introduce that, it really just creates this complication for the client that you just don't need. If you're having a mild attraction, which it kind of sounds like this therapist might be having, where the therapist just was noting her breasts and was like, oh, those are attractive, or, who knows. I think that what he should do, if I had a student or a supervisee that was asking me what to do, we'd have a long conversation about their sort of philosophy. And as long as they weren't of that philosophy to constantly be radically honest all the time, I would say that they should definitely not tell the client. They should definitely stop looking at the breasts. They should definitely work on this stuff and talk with me about it whenever they want to and figure out what's going on with them, because for a therapist to particularly have intense feelings towards a client, it's 99, if not 100% of the time, because the therapist is not getting their needs met outside of therapy. That's my opinion, that is shown in a lot of the data, and it's my experience in that I feel pretty good about my life regarding getting my needs met in that way, and have always been pretty good about that, just not being neglectful of all my needs, including those needs. And therefore, when I'm sitting down in front of a client, it's not going to sneak out because I don't have unmet needs, generally speaking, So I don't generally experience those kinds of feelings towards a client. Or if I do, it's so fleeting and minor and more intellectual, like, oh, that person's attractive. Anyway, moving on. And I have so much nurturing energy in my heart for my clients that it completely eclipses anything else that would be happening. I'm not saying I'm better than other people, but I'm just saying that it's not hard to have a well-balanced life so that it doesn't interfere with your work with clients. But also, as what's happening here, would it have been better if the therapist, one, just didn't stare at the breasts, and two, just said something else? Like the therapist could say like, oh, so you were picking up on some energy with me, huh? Well, one, I'll never cross any boundaries. Two, I don't have those kind of feelings for you. And, the therapist could argue that they're not lying because how do you define those feelings, And would the client be better off because of that? I think so, honestly, because introducing this question into the room, it can really be distracting and in itself is exploitative, like the client that's writing in here, the listener who's writing in, a boundary has, like an official boundary hasn't been crossed, but a sort of boundary and violation has occurred. A boundary crossing has occurred, and it can feel violating for the therapist to admit. It sounds like giving some kind of vague impression or communication to the client that he was indeed sexually attracted to her and was looking at her breasts. It really throws a wrench in the trust, in what's happening, in the feeling that you get from a therapist. Everything starts to get filtered through that. Is the therapist really listening to me, or is the therapist sexually fantasizing? Like, what's happening? And again, like I said, there is an argument for being honest and real and human while also having very firm boundaries and keeping the frame of therapy and just admitting that humans are humans and there's nothing wrong with sexual attraction. Yeah, so that could be happening, but unless you're really good at it and you really know what you're doing and you have a lot of consultation and experience and supervision around this, I don't understand why therapists can't just shut up about it and deal with it on their own. Just keep it in your pants and figure out how to get your needs met and just stop. Anyway, let's take a break. All right, we're back from the break. So I thought I would do another OPP, this time with the letter N, as in Nancy. We have Veronica Needler from 2015, also from October. So Veronica, thanks for signing up right in the very, very beginning. We got Neil from 2016. We have NB from Pasco, Washington, 2016. Nathan, good old Nathan from God knows where, 2016. Noah from 2016. Janelle from Montlake Terrace. Wait, I think we did Janelle because a different letter had come up, maybe J or something. Nick from Kalamazoo, Michigan, from 2017. Michael from Canton, Georgia. Nick from 2017. Nari from Seattle. Nina from Edmonton, Alberta, 2018. Nicole from Monticello, New York, 2018. Thank you so much for becoming a patron and having the letter M in your name. The next email is from patron Nacho from Southwest France. He says, I'd like to know your opinion about the insanity plea or insanity defense in the U.S. judicial system. A penny for your thoughts. Cheers. End of email. Yeah, well, opinion? It's complicated, and I studied forensic psychology, and a fair amount of that involves the insanity defense. And, I'm forgetting all my terminology. It's been a while. But, okay, where do I begin? The principle I absolutely stand behind in that due to mental illness and episodes of mental illness, individuals can be very, very different, be in a very, very different state of mind, and or believe things that are so out of the ordinary and disjointed from reality that they don't really know what they're doing, So imagine that you have someone who's schizophrenic and fully delusional. And by the way, this is not typical of people with schizophrenia, but it does happen at times where someone is completely delusional and they believe that their neighbor is literally the devil and that their neighbor is trying to kill them and their family and is going to do so at midnight tonight unless they do something about it. Well, if that were a real situation, we could understand that the person with schizophrenia is acting out of self-defense when they attack their neighbor, right? But they're delusional. So let's say that they get treatment and, after the crime, they get treatment and they're no longer delusional. How culpable are they? Now, we could ask other questions like, did they know they had schizophrenia and did they go off their medication 6 months prior and risk having that delusional episode? Or was this the very first episode they've ever had? Or did they have the episode because they were strung out on meth? Or did they have the episode because they had a traumatic brain injury or something? There's a lot of different questions to ask, and all those questions are explored when you are seeking that, determination by the trier of fact in court. So it's complicated, and I absolutely stand by it, because if we're trying to reduce crime, then we have to understand why someone committed the crime. And if someone commits a crime while they are having a break from reality, then that should be recognized in court, and the sentence should reflect that. Should they go to prison or should they go to a mental health institution so that they can get the treatment? And maybe even post, incarceration or post-hospitalization, maybe they'll be required to check in with a probation person to make sure that they're compliant with medication. You know what I mean? So we're addressing a specific factor that leads to crime that is more suitable to why it happened. I'm a little distracted because the neighbor's dogs are barking, which is sort of triggering my dogs to bark, and it's driving me nuts. It's really distracting. I don't think you can hear it, but we have these new neighbors that have these really barky dogs, and the neighbors don't do anything about it. It drives me nuts. I mean, my dogs bark, God bless, but, just leaving them outside to bark for an hour a day straight, just constant fucking barking, it's so fucking aggravating. Just bring your dogs inside. That's what we do. Anyway, where was I? So with the insanity defense, there's another, most people think of the insanity defense as a way to get away with something, but that is not the case. If anything, if you are found to be insane at the time of the crime and convicted of that, and say it was murder, and if it wasn't found that you were insane at the time of the crime, then you would have served, let's say 15 years. There's a chance that being determined insane at the time of the crime, you will be you'll be behind bars for the rest of your life, because when it comes to the insanity defense, it works differently typically, depending on the state and the jurisdiction and the ruling and the crime and stuff. But often what that means is that at a certain point in time, the psychiatrist or a team of psychiatrists have to sign off that you are safe to leave. And culturally, or the way that it works among these assessors, is that they have a very high bar of to release someone into the public. I don't know exactly why that is, but I could speculate as to why that would be. So for a lot of people, if they're found insane at the time of the crime, that is not just excusing it or letting them go. It, in a lot of ways, means that they are perhaps being treated unfairly by the justice system. And so sometimes, like if I had a friend who was thinking about claiming to be insane at the time of the crime, I would caution them against it because they might end up in prison forever. Having said that, there are some people that are viably released very early, even though they committed murder, because they are compliant with medication. And there's enough reason to believe that if they are monitored regarding medication and checking in with their professionals, that they won't become delusional and therefore are very low risk of recidivization. That's anyway. So I'm sort of rambling. The other thing I'll say is that it can be kind of hard to determine insanity at the time of the crime because a lot of the assessment has to do with asking the defendant about their state of mind. And people can fake things. And although a lot of people in my profession, in forensic psychology, whenever I would raise this topic, I would say things like, well, someone could be lying really well, particularly today with the internet giving them some guidance about how to answer certain questions to act like they're insane at the time of the crime or insane at the time of the trial, incompetent to stand trial. I would get a lot of pushback. I don't know if it's just my circle or something, but particularly from professionals, people that were actually working in forensic psychology, they would clap back very quickly against me and say, no, we have ways. We know how to figure out if someone is malingering or faking or feigning. We have various different tests. And, I was trained and used a lot of the same tests and, they're pretty good, but they're not perfect. And particularly if you have if you have an individual is very good at lying, they absolutely can get away with it. So it's an imperfect system and hard to know sometimes, Plus, you can suffer from delusions and schizophrenia and psychosis and still know the difference between right and wrong. Just because you think that your neighbor is the devil doesn't necessarily mean that you don't understand that killing someone is wrong, And how do you answer those questions? And again, you have to go off of not only what the defendant claims, they would claim on the stand, I was delusional at the time, and can you believe them or not? And that's not the only thing that you look at. You look at a pattern, you ask what other people saw, there's certain ways that delusional people will act in the moment and will say things, and particularly once they get picked up by law enforcement, that kind of thing, it's complicated. But so you're asking what my opinion is that generally speaking, contrary to popular belief, it's a pretty good system. If anything, the system is not flexible enough. If anything, the system doesn't allow the defense to work as much as it probably should. Very, very few people will even use it in a defense. And of the people that use it, very few actually are granted it. So I think that it's reacted against unfairly, if I'm making any sense. Anyway, let's read another email. All right, this next email is from annual patron and YouTube member Tiffany from Nevada. She says, Dear Dr. Kirk, I am a longtime listener and I have a question about terminology. I know that you have said the term codependent is not the same as enmeshment. Just chiming in. Yeah, they're overlapping, I suppose, but quite different things going on. If a person had a parent growing up, overlapping meaning that you can have both and they often are related, but you can have one without the other, and not everyone who is codependent is enmeshed. Anyway, without getting into the weeds on this, let's move on. If a person had a parent growing up that had struggles with substance abuse, then gets into a relationship with someone who does not use substances but has similar patterns of interaction. Okay, so just chiming in here, the scenario, the hypothetical. If a person had a parent growing up that had struggles with substance abuse. Okay, so first of all, if you have a parent that has substance abuse, that does not mean that you are going to be codependent or enmeshed. it doesn't even necessarily mean that you'll have any kind of complex at all around it. But and it's an oversimplification that people will have, that if you have an alcoholic parent that you automatically will be codependent or enmeshed or something. That's just definitely not the case according to research and my experience. But anyway, so if a person had a parent growing up that had struggles with substance abuse, okay, and then gets into a relationship with someone who does not use substances but has similar patterns of interaction, okay, just chiming in, so that similar patterns of interaction, meaning that they are rageful, or I don't know, or they're under functioning in some way, or they're addicted to a behavior like gambling. I don't know exactly. There's a lot of different things you could slot in there, but would that person be labeled as codependent or enmeshed? Thank you. End of email. It completely depends. So if someone, well, it wouldn't matter what it obviously matters what the childhood is, but you can grow up with a parent who struggles with substance abuse and, like I said, not have any noticeable effects growing up, depending on the protective factors and therapy and all that kind of stuff. So really what we're asking is, what terminology do we use for someone who is in a relationship with someone that has behaviors that are like someone who suffers from addiction but isn't addicted to substances, which it really depends on what sort of thing you're referring to. But yeah, generally speaking, in the past, we might call that person codependent because you have a dependent-like person, and then you have the codependent, which is the co-pilot to the dependency. But today, we wouldn't necessarily use that language because we don't know. We don't know if their partner is a co-pilot in the problem. And also in today's language, in the language I like to use, we like to use the word codependent as a form of a personality disorder that's oriented towards overfunctioning and finding an underfunctioner to match up with. So there are too many other questions. Is the person who has addiction-like behaviors, are they underfunctioning in general, personality-wise? Because in all likelihood, their partner is codependent, but we don't know. You can have an underfunctioner who pushes someone to be sort of overfunctioning, but that person is. Anyway, listen to my whole deep dive on codependency because I kind of go into that. So the other thing I wanted to do today is something that I've wanted to do for a long time. I often want to do it with Berto, but I never get around to it. So I just thought I would tack it at the end of this episode. So I'm going to end this episode by just talking about the various different TV shows and movies that I've watched lately. Because, I don't know, I just have to get a lot of things off my chest, and, maybe you'll be interested. And from the onset, I'll say that TV shows and movies are art. And like any art, whether it's a painting or a song or a musical artist or whatever, is experienced by people in different ways. So if you liked something that I didn't like, that's normal, and doesn't mean that you're a bad person or I'm a bad person or we couldn't get along. And vice versa. If I like something that you hated, it doesn't mean I'm stupid. It's actually kind of astonishing to me. Like when I hear that someone loves country music, I just think, okay, yeah, a lot of people like country music. I hate country music. But, it's just a product of my upbringing. Literally no one I knew listened to country music growing up. And I don't know if I know a single person. I think I have a friend who might listen to country sometimes, but I don't know anyone who listens to country music. In fact, most people I know hate it as well. And, and so I just grew out of that culture. But I also understand that a lot of people like country music, which is fine. And there's various different kinds of country music. So if someone likes a TV show that I hate, like if someone liked Episode 9, Rise of Skywalker, Star Wars, that's fine. My parents liked it. Does that mean that they're stupid or wrong or something? No. So just understand that. Everyone take a breath. So I am looking at my IMDb ratings, and I'm just going to look at the things that I've rated recently. So last night I rewatched Black Panther from 2018, and originally I gave it an 8 out of 10, but I bumped it down to a 7 because although 7 is a pretty high number for me, I reserve 7s for a solidly good recommended movie. I think I was just swept up in the magic of the movie at the time. Rewatching it, it did not have any of that magic anymore. And God bless the actor who died. But so I took it down from an 8 to a 7. I also watched a Minecraft movie, and although I liked the beginning, throughout, it's not made for me. It's made for tweens who like Minecraft, and from my understanding, they loved it. Chicken jockey, the whole thing. But as a movie, it had a pretty weird structure, and there were scenes that I was actually fast forwarding through. Basically, whenever they did Minecrafty things, I like Minecraft. I've played it. I liked the characters. I liked the 5 people that, the cast. I liked it when they were interacting and having their character story arcs, which were pretty minimal, but I liked that. But whenever they were fighting and flying through CGI landscapes, I was completely bored. It wasn't very exciting. So I gave it a 3 out of 10. But that movie's not made for me. I've been watching It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, the new season. And although I liked the first couple episodes, the third episode, the one with all the peppers and the EMT and stuff, I thought that episode was pretty bad, honestly, which is hard to say. So I gave it a 4 out of 10. The Penguin TV show on HBO Max, I rated that an 8 out of 10. The first half is very different from the second half of that season. The first half I thought was some of the best TV we've ever seen, or I've ever seen. The second half, I don't know, it felt like rushed, but 8 out of 10, good. Andor, of course, season 2. I just love that show. Andor season 1, season 2, plus Rogue One is some of the most fantastic, TV and movies of all time, but also in the Star Wars universe is by far the best stuff to me. But, you can have your own opinion. I watched Alien Romulus, which is the most recent Alien movie from last year, and I liked it. I gave it a 6 out of 10. I really liked the beginning. It's very classic Alien, and I liked all the characters, and it had none of that sort of Ridley Scott silliness of everyone acting like an idiot. But the second half, it just seemed like it just became real action-y, and I don't like long, boring action scenes. That's what I'm trying to say. Although I love, I rewatched the Dungeons and Dragons movie, Honor Among Thieves. I'm finding myself watching that movie like every month, once a month, and every time I laugh and I cry, and I'm a D&D nerd, but I think it's also just a really good movie. I think it's really well written. It moves fast. It has a lot of action scenes, right? But the action has story to it, and it's not drawn out the way that a lot of these movies have really drawn out long sequences of just massive CGI, and there's no story arc to it. Like in the Dungeons and Dragons movie, they meet up with this very overweight red dragon, which has its own comedy, but absolute peril to it. You're really worried about everybody. And the way they get out of it is very much story oriented, in that you have Chris Pine telling the sorcerer to do something. I don't know. And the paladin is like, I'm seeing a harper step into his shoes again. It's just, I just think it's one of the most satisfying, rich, and they have this whole storyline where Holga meets up with her ex-husband, played by Bradley Cooper, and it's very touching and very sweet, but also story oriented. And I don't know, it's just amazing. I went and saw Superman in movie theaters, the new one, 2025. I liked it. I gave it an 8 out of 10. Maybe I was just in that mood. The ending kind of has that long, drawn-out CGI fight, but the whole thing, people are criticizing it and I was worried about it having too many characters. Like it just has so many characters that you're trying to introduce for the first time. But I thought that James Gunn wrote it in a way that it didn't feel bloated, but it was so nice. You know, I'm a fan of the Christopher Reeves first two movies. The Superman 3 and 4 in the 80s are horrible, especially 4. So let's not venerate all of those movies, but I didn't mind Man of Steel, the Zack Snyder version. But it's not my Superman. This is my Superman. And the actor who plays Superman is great, and the colors and the style and the saving of the people. And it was goofy. There's definitely some real goofy campiness to it, but I enjoyed it. One Night in Idaho is a documentary about the Idaho college murders that happened. It's a documentary that came out in 2025. And it's on Prime, and I don't know why. I think I saw some news story about, these college kids that were murdered kind of randomly by this guy who was a graduate student and a weirdo and stuff. And I decided to watch this documentary, and it's I gave it a 5 out of 10 because they kind of strung it out a lot. There was a lot of. And, I respect so the documentary was good, and I support it because it really focused on the victims. It wasn't just about the salacious murders and the blood and it really focused on the community and the family members and the victims, and showed a lot of pictures and talked about, their good qualities. And so instead of glorifying the murderer, it's glorifying the victims, which should be done, but it's not very compelling to me to just watch hours and hours of people talking about how great the victims were, and I found that they seemingly were stringing out the story, because I was wondering, okay, so what happened? I was halfway through, I don't know, like 4 or 5 episodes, and I still wasn't clear what the crime was exactly, So, it's worth a while. I recently rewatched The Suicide Squad. Wait. Right. So from 2021, the second one, the one with the guy who shoots out the polka dots and stuff, I gave it a 7. I think, is that a James Gunn? I think so. And 7 out of 10, fun, not amazing. I recently watched Kunk on Life. I think her full character name is Philomena Kunk. I gave it a 7 out of 10. I find her humor to be funny. Some people find her humor to not be funny, but I find it to be funny. Some people think she's being real, which I find to be interesting. I recently rewatched My Blue Heaven from 1990 with Rick Moranis and Steve Martin. Very goofy movie, but I liked it, 7 out of 10. I recently watched Man of Steel again, and, well, I guess I gave it a 3 out of 10. So I've fluctuated. I think I've watched Man of Steel, the Superman movie from 2013. God, that long ago. I think I've watched it 3 times in overtime, and I think the first time I was like, yeah, fine. I think the second time I was like, oh, maybe it's better than I thought it was, but recently rewatching it in the lead up to the more recent Superman movie, I was like, actually, this movie has a lot. The beginning I liked, but as the movie progresses, it's so, I don't know, just kind of boring, honestly. I recently watched the movie Dave from 1995. Basically, the plot of this movie is that Kevin Kline looks like the president and is called in to be a body double for the president. And then the president falls ill, and this lookalike stands in for the president and acts a lot different, right? He's more real. And I thought it'd be I remember liking it, and I watched it and liked it again. I gave it a 7 out of 10. Mission Impossible. I watched that in the theater. It came out 2025. I think it's like Mission Impossible 8 is another way to say it. It's the 8th movie with Tom Cruise. And I went in with very low expectations because the last few Mission Impossible movies I find to be overly dramatic and melodramatic and talky and exposition-y and confusing at times. And I was delighted. I gave it a 7 out of 10. I thought that this most recent one did not suffer from what the previous iteration of Mission Impossible, and I thought it, delivered on what it was trying to do. It's it's a fun popcorn movie is the thing. Oh my God, I want to talk about The Residents. I'm kind of late to the game with this, but I have watched this show 2.5 times through now. I'm watching it a third time. So if you don't know, it's a Netflix miniseries, 8 episodes. Moves very quickly. Just came out in 2025, and it's a murder mystery in the White House, and it's a comedy. And often I'll be working late at night, and I'll go upstairs to get a glass of water or something, and I'll walk through the living room, and I'll see Stacy is watching something. Often she's watching 90 Day Fiancé or Love is Blind or some other show, like what's the one with This Is Life, or the one that that one show. Or she'll be watching other kinds of dramas like that. But she was watching The Residents, and I will sometimes pause and just watch TV for like a few seconds with her. And I paused it, and I started watching The Residents with her, and it was like on the episode 3 or something. And I didn't know what I was watching, but I knew that it was good, like right away. I didn't know what was happening. I was just like, oh, the writing and the editing and the acting and everything is just, I don't even know what's happening, and I'm entertained. And so I quickly, later that night, decided to watch that show, and I binged the entire show in one evening. It's 8 episodes. I was up till like 5 in the morning. I mean, because it's a whodunit, so you're like, oh, whodunit. But it is also just so funny and so interesting, and so it's edited so well, and the message is subtle but powerful to me anyway. The protection of the American institutions that are important and uphold the true American way, which is to lead the way with freedom and equality, And it doesn't have that explicit message, but it has an adjacent message anyway. But the editing and the acting and the comedy and the characters, and it's just so. And then towards the end of the season, we learn about these 2 other characters that have a connection, and we spend some time with them, and we've only seen them in the background, and all of a sudden we get to know them, and it's one of the most touching love stories I've ever seen, and it's just this side story of this larger whodunit. And whenever you have these kind of murder mystery things, the reveal at the end is never completely satisfying, but that's not the point. And I knew that watching it, that in all likelihood, as they presented suspects to us, like the pastry chef and that kind of thing, I was suspecting that none of these people are the murderer, because it's 8 episodes, so there's a certain way that they'll do a story arc about this sort of thing, And I just figured that I was not going to be able to predict who did it. And I don't know, I loved Al Franken and the story with the other senator. I think her name was Bix. She's sort of a better version of Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think. And I don't know, just everything. And I'm watching it a third time. And there's things I didn't notice the first time through. And I love the whole birding kind of joke along the way. And I love the fact that the detective is good, but she's not magical, like the way that Sherlock Holmes is often portrayed in movies and TV as essentially being like magical. She's human and makes mistakes. She actually makes a number of mistakes and even admits it. She's at some point later in the season, she's like, "Oh, why didn't I see that? I'm so stupid." And you're like, well, come on. I mean, how could you notice that thing? But at the same time, it's just nice to not have a magical, all good, all knowing, omnipotent person at the center of a story like this, because typically they'll do that. And I don't know, it's just a really, there'll be a season 2 and I'm guessing it'll suck because, any successful show will eventually catch the eye of the people who hold the money, the producers and the studio. And once they get their hands on something, they always ruin it. So I don't have high hopes for season 2, but season 1 I thought was great. I recently rewatched Stuck on You from 2003. I think it's a Farrelly Brothers movie. Yeah. And it stars Matt Damon and Greg Kinnear. And it's not great. I gave it a 4 out of 10. It's fine. I also rewatched the movie from 1996, John Travolta, and the movie Phenomenon, and I gave it a 3 out of 10. It's it's fine for what it sets out to do, but it's pretty boring and goofy. I finally watched Jack Black's Gulliver's Travels movie from 2010. And it's terrible. It is so not funny, and the script is awful. I don't even understand the tone of the movie. I gave it a 3 out of 10. I mean, it's not awful, but it's not like a 1 out of 10 to my mind. And I'll check in again with y'all. Like, if you loved Gulliver's Travels and you are upset that I didn't like it, just release that and say, the chance of us aligning on everything isn't going to be there. I finally watched the movie Stay Tuned from 1992 with John Ritter, in which they get sucked into cable television or satellite television. It has some very funny moments, particularly in the beginning. I gave it a 5 out of 10, but overall it just kind of spins out of control. Okay, I have to tell you about a movie that I watch every year called Youth and Revolt 2009 with Michael Cera. It is a 10 out of 10 for me. I love this movie. It's kind of like Wes Anderson-y. Oh, I want to get back to The Residence. People are saying The Residence is kind of like Wes Anderson, but I don't understand why people are saying that, because it's not, I mean, I guess kind of in its cartoony way, I guess it is, but the only thing that's reminiscent of Wes Anderson are the title screens, which have these sort of childish drawings that kind of look like a Wes Anderson graphic, and they will zoom out of the White House and show it as like a dollhouse, and Wes Anderson will do that as well. Like with Steve Zissou, Life Aquatic, right? They would pull out from the ship and you could see all the different rooms, or he'll do that in other movies as well, like on a house. He'll make it kind of look like a dollhouse. And they do that with the White House. And yeah, I guess that kind of is a thing that Wes Anderson does, but it's certainly not, Wes Anderson didn't invent it. And I would not say The Residence is comedically or tonally anything like a Wes Anderson movie. But anyway, but Youth and Revolt is kind of Wes Anderson-y. If it's sort of like if you're a fan of Wes Anderson's first movie, which is Bullet something, right? It's the Luke and Owen Wilson, and anyway, what's it, Bullet? Anyway, it's the very first movie, and it's darker and more, and it doesn't have all that cutesiness in it, and so, which I love, by the way. I love the cutesiness of Wes Anderson, although I haven't loved his more recent movies. Although I understand he has a movie coming out soon. Anyway, but Youth and Revolt, Michael Cera, it is I don't know. There's just I could see how people would hate this movie, and I think it got bad reviews, but I love it. It's at a time in Michael Cera's career where he could do no wrong. I mean, there were so many great movies that he was in around that time. I'm just going to look on IMDb and look at his the movies he was making in the late aughts. Let's see here. So if I do that and look at all of this, scroll down on the list. Okay, so he is first in Superbad. So, he's first in Arrested Development, which is one of my favorite shows of all time. Then he's cast as Superbad. I actually re-watched some scenes from Superbad, and it doesn't age well, that movie. It still has some really funny moments, but it's interesting to watch that movie from 2007, almost 20 years ago, and just see it through a different lens. You're like, oh, I don't know. The same year he's in Juno, which to me almost ages better as the years go on in some ways. Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist, which I enjoyed, gave a 7 out of 10. I only watched that once. I loved Year One with Jack Black. I gave that a 10. I watched that once a year. I understand people hate that movie, which I can understand. Youth and Revolt, 10 out of 10. Scott Pilgrim, 8 or 9 out of 10. So in the span of just like a couple years, he made all those great movies. And then he's just in like some real duds, like The Crystal Fairy and the Magical Cactus was terrible. I think it was a script thing. But I also think Michael Cera was starting to kind of go off the deep end some. And then he was in This Is the End, that sort of bro movie with all those bro guys. I gave it a 5 out of 10. It's funny. There are some funny moments, but it's a little, a little goofy. He was a voice of the Sausage Party, which I loved, 8 out of 10. Lego Movie Batman, he plays Robin, right? I love that, 8 out of 10. Apparently he's in Twin Peaks. I couldn't watch the reboot or the next version of Twin Peaks. I loved Twin Peaks early 90s. I was absolutely obsessed. But watching it in the more recent iteration, David Lynch, rest in peace, actually worked on it. And I don't know, it was hard to get through. So that's Michael Cera's filmography. If you're still listening, God bless you. First, I rewatched Spies Like Us from 1985. It has Dan Aykroyd and what's his face? What's his name? Chevy Chase. And I remember this movie was very hyped because Chevy Chase was such a big deal at the time, and it was like everything he was in was considered to be the best movie of all time. And Dan Aykroyd was also very loved at the time. But this movie, I remember when I saw it when I was 14 in the theaters and thinking, oh, I guess these guys aren't automatically funny. Now, I rewatched it, and I'm pretty sure Paul McCartney actually sang a song for it, right? And I was really into Paul McCartney when I was 14, in the Beatles. And I just wanted to rewatch it just to, because I totally forgot what it was about, and it wasn't horrible. It wasn't great. 5 out of 10. Berto and I talked about Black Mirror, so I rated all those episodes. I also recently rewatched the 2005 Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and the beginning is super funny. The second half is not. And that's the way the book is, if you've read the book. It starts out so good, but it becomes, I don't know, just a little wandering and not very funny or interesting. And that's the way the movie is. I also recently rewatched Old School from 2003, another bro movie, Will Ferrell, all those guys, Luke Wilson. And I demoted it probably from a 7 to a 6. I don't remember. I remember I liked it more in the past. And I think it's fine. I think it's got some, the earmuffs, and it's got a good storyline, and a lot of it doesn't age well. but I wasn't laughing as much as I was back in the day. I finally watched Pop Star Never Stop, Never Stopping in 2016. You know, those guys with what's his name, Andy Sandberg, and company. They made a mockumentary about a pop star, and I always heard that this movie was amazing, and I just never got around to watching it. So I finally got around to watching it in 2016. Gave it a 6 out of 10. Again, the beginning is strong, and then it just gets a little like it should have been. Well, I'm looking now. It's actually 90 minutes, less than 90 minutes. It felt like longer than that. I felt like they had a 45-minute idea that was stretched out to 90 minutes. Okay, I finally watched MacGruber, the movie from 2010 with Will Forte, right? Gave it a 7 out of 10. Solid movie. Hilarious. There's very few sketches from SNL that translate well into movies. Well, getting back to Al Franken, I actually really like the Al Franken movie. What's it called? He plays a kind of like a therapist-y person. What's it called? Gosh darn it, People Love You. Anyway, that movie. I like that one. There's some others, like Blues Brothers and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I also, let's see, what's other. I watched for the second time the movie that came out a few years ago called The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. So this is the movie with Nicolas Cage and Pedro Pascal. Pedro Pascal plays this really rich guy who is obsessed with movies and Nicolas Cage, and he pays to have Nicolas Cage come out to his resort on the Mediterranean, and hijinks ensue. And I don't know if it's just the Gen X-ness of the whole movie, but it's hilarious, I find. And the story is touching, and it has some good action in the end. I gave it an 9 out of 10. I thought it was like touching and funny, and felt almost kind of like it could actually happen in some ways. And so, yeah, I love that movie. I finally watched G.I. Jane. I don't know why. Maybe because Demi Moore was, being talked about from that one movie she was in that was nominated for an Oscar. Did she win? For, what was that movie? I actually did not watch that movie, the one about you inject yourself and you look young again. Because I saw like 3 seconds of the scene in which Dennis Quaid is eating shrimp, and the sound and the camera up his face, and people were saying it was really gross. I get the message, and I stand behind all of that, and it sounds like Demi Moore was great. Wasn't she in the movie? But I can't handle that, and Stacy really can't handle it. And since I watched most of my movies with Stacy, I kept putting it off, and then I was just like, yeah, I just don't. I don't. And it's weird because there's some movies like Existenz, if you remember, what's his name? Oh, that director who made a lot of really weird movies, Naked Lunch and all that kind of stuff. Like, I'm into that stuff. I can handle that. But anyway, I think because of that, I finally watched G.I. Jane. I never watched it when it came out. And I thought it was actually not as bad as I thought. I gave it a 5 out of 10. It was fine. I could see people really liking that movie because it has a feminist message for sure. And Demi Moore does a great job, I think. But the script is, I don't know, it just didn't really have the oomph that I was looking for. I watched I think it's a Netflix movie, yeah, called Electric State, the one with Chris Pratt and Millie Bobby Brown. And the thing about Electric State is that I loved watching it, but the story was so dumb. There were so many visuals that I thought were something I'd never seen before. Like, wow, that's a really interesting visual. A similar movie was The Creator that came out a few years ago, the one starring Denzel's kid, that similar. I just thought, man, the visuals and the ideas that are being presented, it's similar to actually the TV show Three Body Problem. Some of the ideas and the visuals and scenes are some of the most interesting things I've ever seen. Same with Electric State, same with The Creator, maybe to a lesser extent with Electric State, but the script is like hard to get through. Three Body Problem was easier because it had fewer problems in my mind. The Creator had more problems, but the Electric State the script has so many problems with it. Like, I didn't care. I finally watched Michael Clayton because, Andor was written and directed by Kilgoy, what's his name? the guy who made Andor, and wrote it, I think, with his brother. And apparently he came on the scene with Michael Clayton starring George Clooney, right? From 2007. I gave it a 7 out of 10. The beginning, again, is really good. Actually, reverse. So the beginning is really boring. And I'm like, when is this movie going to start up? And then about halfway through, it gets going. But even then, so I loved the style, but I wished that, and I respect its pacing, I respect a movie that doesn't explain things to everyone. But 7 out of 10, let's see, I watched the Menendez brothers Netflix show, as we were prepping for the deep dive, and Monsters, which was the show. One Menendez brothers was the documentary, and Monsters was the TV show. I gave the Menendez brothers documentary a 4 out of 10 because it felt a little bloated. And then Monsters, the TV show, is that? Yeah, that's the one, right? Monsters. Let me click on it. Yeah, that's the Menendez brothers TV show. I gave it a 3 out of 10. I found it to be not very interesting as a TV show. Let's see what else is on my list here. I recently rewatched Deep Impact for some reason from 1998. Gave it a 6 out of 10. It's fine. Sinners. Okay, so y'all probably have seen Sinners, the movie, with what's his face playing two different twins, Michael B. Jordan, and I gave it a 6 out of 10. I'm guessing y'all hate me for that. I thought I loved the beginning, loved it. Then when all the gore and the horror and the killing and the blood and the stabbings and the eatings, I was bored out of my mind. I'm like, okay, everyone's getting killed, but I'm just not into that kind of movie. And the first half has nothing to do with it. It's like, it's similar to From Dusk Till Dawn, which is, the first half was written and directed, I believe, by Quentin Tarantino, and then the second half is written and directed by, what's his name? Spy Kids guy? Anyway, love the beginning, really don't like the ending, and Sinners was like that. And Sinners had a lot of really compelling visuals and story, and felt like I was watching a period piece, a story that could have happened back in the day, a story that often isn't told. And the vampire stuff was compelling in the beginning, like when those hillbillies show up, it was exciting and new and interesting and gritty and felt like something I'd never seen. But then the ending, it felt like I'd seen a lot of movies like that, where it's like, everyone's dying. I was bored out of my mind. Warfare, another 2025 movie. Oh boy, I'm guessing most haven't seen this movie. 7 out of 10. It's kind of like Black Hawk Down if it was even more realistic. And having a friend of mine who died in Afghanistan doing something very similar to this, and hearing about people being injured and from him, and also just being an American, keeping tabs on what our military is doing overseas, particularly back then. This movie I found to be one of the most important war movies that's ever been made, because it just is, it's like a recreation, and there's enough drama in the real story that you don't have to fictionalize it up. But I don't recommend watching it, honestly, because it's hard to watch. And they don't pull any punches, there's no, the good guys that they're kind of focusing on, the American military guys, they treat the locals horribly, and they don't pull any punches at all. Recently we watched the Untouchables movie with Robert De Niro and Kevin Costner, Sean Connery. So I have gone all over the board with the Untouchables. So I'm in the right category. I'm Gen X, I'm a dude, I'm straight, I'm cis. Of course I like the Untouchables. But when I saw it as a kid, I liked it. And then I watched it again when I was older, and I hated it. Then I rewatched it again, and I've probably watched it, a handful of times. And the most recent watching, I gave it an 8 out of 10, because I could... part of it, honestly, is that so many movies today don't have great writing or try to do too much CGI or something, that the Untouchables felt like more, I don't know, like a reprieve from all that. So, but also I think I just could appreciate what, wasn't it Brian De Palma, what they were trying to do with the movie. So yeah, but maybe I'll watch it again in 5 years and I'll hate it again. Let's see. I finally watched Some Like It Hot from 1959 with Jack Lemmon, right? And Tony Curtis and Marilyn Monroe. Totally famous movie, right? And everyone has seen it except for me. And I watched it, and oh my God, it is a funny-ass movie. And I gave it a 7 out of 10. A little long, but funny. And that's the thing. Like, it's 2 hours long, this movie. So the idea that all movies are 90 minutes in the past, I think that's an 80s thing, honestly. Anyway. Adolescence, the TV show, 4 episodes. I gave it a 6 out of 10. Some people might be surprised by that, but I liked is it the 3rd episode, right? Yeah, the 3rd episode, the one where it's all the forensic assessment. I totally respect the artistry and the message and the acting. It's very respectable. It's all one shot, that whole thing. Very realistic, but not super entertaining, and it's not supposed to be. So I guess I don't know how to rate it, but in terms of just like a show that I watched to entertain myself, it was a 6 out of 10. For some reason, these next movies I don't remember watching recently, but I'll mention. Coraline, great movie, 9 out of 10. Grave of the Fireflies, oof, great movie. Oh my God, Grave of the Fireflies, 10 out of 10. Ralph Breaks the Internet, love that movie, 8 out of 10. Star Wars, the Clone Wars TV show, 8 out of 10. That one I could give, like, some episodes are 10 out of 10, some are 5. Nazca, Valley of the Wind, what's his face? Miyazaki, 10 out of 10. Tangled, the Disney, isn't it Disney? 10 out of 10. Love that movie. Oh my God. I probably watch Tangled once a year and laugh my ass off and cry. I even watch like the featurettes and stuff. There's this featurette with the horse and a ring. And anyway, I recently rewatched The Iron Giant from 1999. 10 out of 10. Just a perfect movie. Akira, 1988, perfect movie, 10 out of 10, very important. Barefoot Gen, oh my God, horrible, but wonderful, 10 out of 10, similar to Grave of the Fireflies, very important movie. For some reason, I rated Over the Hedge, the cartoon from 2006. I remember liking that movie, 7 out of 10. Oh, I recently watched Beowulf from 2007. It was like the first all CGI trying to look realistic movie, I think, and I love that movie, 8 out of 10. I could see how people would hate it, though. Okay, I went on a jag of watching the Madagascar Penguins movies and similar movies, Kung Fu Panda, Incredibles, Penguins of Madagascar, and I gave them all anywhere from 7, 8, 9, 10. Penguins of Madagascar from 2014, I gave 10 out of 10. I love that movie. Oh, Arcane. All y'all might be wondering about my thoughts on Arcane. Okay. So that's a cartoon, if you're not familiar, Netflix. It's sort of anime-ish, but not anime. I think it's made by a French company, if I'm not mistaken. And I was obsessed with the first season. A family member of mine told me that I might like it, and I started watching it, and I binged. That's when you really like something. You're just like, oh my God, I don't have to force myself to watch this. So the first season I thought was some of the best TV that's ever been made. The second season started off in this whole other kind of, I don't know, it just felt like a different show to me. The storylines changed. There were new characters. I just wanted them to get back to the original people and to keep it a little bit more grounded. And I know that's controversial. I'm sure there's a lot of fans out there that love the second season. I did not. I was bored. Moonrise Kingdom, I always love that. I watch that once a year. Me and wife, that's one of our favorite movies. We actually went as them at Halloween one time, 10 out of 10. Oh, Stacy and I watched Twisters, the Twister kind of reboot, if you will, about hurricanes. And I thought this was one of the most annoying, stupidest movies I've ever seen. It was almost like the writer-director was trying to annoy me. They were trying to make this one guy look cool, and all I could think of was just like, he is a total doofus, D-bag. And I know that was kind of the point, but I don't think that was the point anyway. But it was also just boring and silly, and it was just so. I think halfway through the movie, Stacy and I just turned to each other and said, like, do we have to watch the rest of this? I recently watched Gladiator from 2000, Ridley Scott, because I watched Gladiator 2 and did not like it. I didn't hate it, but I didn't like it. And I was wondering, it's the same writer-director, so was Gladiator all that everyone did it deserve to be loved? Maybe it was bad and I just didn't have good taste. I rewatched it. It's a good movie, but it's not amazing. I rewatched Legally Blonde, the movie with what's her name? Reese Witherspoon, 2001. I gave it an 8 out of 10. I love that movie. I think it's really funny. Blades of Glory, same, 10 out of 10. I think Blades of Glory. I could see how people would hate it. Will Ferrell and Napoleon Dynamite guy. That movie is made for me. I just find it to be hilarious. Notting Hill. I saw it when it came out in 1999. Julia Roberts and what's his face from all those movies, Hugh Grant. And I remember liking it when it came out, but rewatching it, I've rewatched it 2 or 3 times in the past year, and I don't know if it just needed time to grow on me or if they just don't make rom-coms like this anymore, but I think Notting Hill is a perfect movie, 10 out of 10. Everything about it. The scene where Hugh Grant meets up with his friends and they invite Julia Roberts, who is this famous actress. She plays a different famous actress. She's kind of like playing herself in a way. And she comes over for this date, and all the little interactions with the friends and the characters and the humor and the heart that it has. And I just think it's a perfect movie. And the way that it is kind of feminist. It's not kind of. There's a definite feminist angle to it that doesn't seem forced, it's good. Flow, the cartoon from last year that I think won an Oscar, and it has no dialogue. It's just about a cat that is trying to survive. 7 out of 10. It wasn't exciting. It's kind of boring at times, but the visuals and you got to watch it on a big screen TV or in the theater because it's so magical. It's art. Every frame is like a painting. Joker 2, Folie à Deux or whatever, 1 out of 10. I hated that movie. I thought it was the goofiest thing. I really wanted to like it. There are some good scenes, but I just found it to be all over the place, and it had definite potential. I mean, the setup, the actors, even it being kind of a weird hallucinatory musical could have worked on me, but it seemed like the script was just lazily, thrown together. The Brutalists, first half loved, second half hated. Not hated, but just was like, okay, let's wrap this up. 6 out of 10. Okay, Wicked. Some of you are going to hate me, but I was meh on Wicked. Part 1, right? I gave it a 5 out of 10. I loved certain parts of this movie. There were some, and I really I've wanted to see, I've seen the advertisements on, theaters downtown Seattle, and I've always been like, oh, I got to go to Wicked. It just seems like the sort of thing I would like. And so finally maybe my expectations were too high, but I don't know, I just kind of felt like I didn't really understand the storyline, really. I don't know if I'm just too stupid, but the involvement of the wizard, I just didn't really understand what everyone's motivation was. Maybe it'll come out in part 2, but at the end of the movie when she's like, what's her line that it's not Let It Go, but she sings this song, and I'm thinking, okay, yeah, but why? I hear you that people have been bullying you, which is uncool, but what's happening? I don't know. Like, I just was a little confused. I think I talked about Anora. Did I not talk about Anora? I loved it. 10 out of 10. I recently watched Mobsters from 1991. For you Gen Xers, you remember this Kristen Slater, Patrick Dempsey vehicle that was trying so hard to be like The Godfather, and it is so not. It is so bad. It's 2 out of 10. Recently we watched Oh Brother, We're Out There, 10 out of 10. Perfect movie. Children of Men with Clive Owen, perfect movie, 10 out of 10. I think it gets better every time I watch it. Let's see. I watched Tremors 2. Isn't Kevin Bacon? Or he's in the first one, right? This one has Fred Ward. Anyway, not great. 4 out of 10. A Real Pain, the movie with Kieran Culkin and Jesse Eisenberg, 7 out of 10. Great movie. I recently rewatched Troy with Brad Pitt, 2004. 6 out of 10. Not a horrible movie, not a great movie. I love history and the legend / history of Troy. I'm an amateur-y kind of history guy and have studied Homer and all that, the Iliad and all that, Agamemnon and Achilles and Hector and Paris and all that stuff. And with a greater appreciation of what they were trying to do, I appreciate what they were trying to do. When I saw it in 2004, I didn't know all that history, and so I think I was just trying to be entertained. But they actually tried to recreate the original story, and they didn't obviously follow it word for word at all, but there are certain story beats, like when the king goes to Achilles and begs him, like there's some and it's interesting to know that someone or a group of people wrote this story thousands of years before the ancient Greeks, or at least hundreds of years before the ancient Greeks, and how moving this story was, how it was passed down, orally, and how it motivated the ancient Greeks, and then the ancient Romans, and then European, this story had global implications on what it motivated and what it elevated and the themes of it. Anyway, 6 out of 10. Charlie Wilson's War, I recently rewatched, the one with Tom Hanks and Julia Roberts and Philip Seymour Hoffman. Oh my God, Philip Seymour Hoffman. On YouTube, sometimes I'll just watch his scenes from this movie because he steals the entire movie. And Julia Roberts and Tom Hanks are great too. And it's a complicated kind of story. And it's actually a kind of a biopic about, I don't know, it's an interesting kind of weird anomaly in Hollywood at the time. And especially post 9/11. Anyway, Spy, I recently watched 2015 with Melissa McCarthy. I love Melissa McCarthy. I love everything that she's in or that I've seen. This is a Paul Feig movie, and I love this movie. 9 out of 10. I think it's hilarious. I recently rewatched a movie from the 80s, 1985, Just One of the Guys. If you're Gen X, you might remember this movie. So it stars this, or the story is that you have this high school girl, right? Let's see. Terry feels discriminated against when the summer jobs at the Sun Tribune go to two guys. She decides to do something about it. She dresses like a guy, gets a haircut. Will students at the other high school notice? So it was kind of a big deal at the time, and it's not a great movie. It's 2 out of 10. It has some funny scenes. Let's see. I recently watched a bunch of other movies I won't bother you with. Let's try to find. Oh, The Darkest Hour. I rewatched that one, about, Gary Oldman is playing Churchill, and I loved it even more the second time I watched. I think the first time I watched that movie, I thought it was going to be more World War II-y, but it's obviously very much about World War II, but it's very focused on Churchill. Now, I understand that there's some creative leeway that they're playing around with. They make Churchill look more of the people when he was very much aristocratic and elitist. So, that's not great, but you're trying to sell to a modern audience. But anyway, Gary Oldman just nails it. I love him. I was on the record early in Gary Oldman's career in the mid-90s. I declared back then that Gary Oldman was the best actor that had ever lived, and he had yet to be in all of the things that he has been in, and he's just so good. Let's look at his filmography and then end the episode. So I'm looking on IMDb, and I have to scroll down a ways. Actually, I should just look on Wikipedia because they'll separate out the movies from the TV shows and all the shorts and stuff. So Wikipedia, filmography. I hate it when Wikipedia doesn't give that option. There we go. Okay, so, all right, let's start from the beginning. I'm just going to tell you the movies that I remember him from. The first movie I saw him in was Sid and Nancy. He plays Sid Vicious, 1986. Perfect movie, so good. There's a bunch of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead in 1990. This was kind of a big deal to me. It's a surreal movie, and it's sort of comedy slash Shakespeare-y fan fiction. And when I was 19 years old and saw this in the theater, it sort of blew my mind. I've recently rewatched some scenes from it and find it to be a little up its own asshole, but the movie I really remember him from is State of Grace, which is kind of like a crime drama, and it has Sean Penn and Ed Harris and Robin Wright and John Turturro, and people don't talk about this movie, but Gary Oldman plays a really great character. And then Henry and June was also a big deal to me, and I won't tell you why, but it was. He was in JFK. He played Lee Harvey Oswald, but he wasn't. But then he was in Bram Stoker's Dracula. He plays Dracula. That was a big deal. He was in True Romance. He plays, kind of a funny character in that. Romeo is Bleeding. Leon the Professional. He plays the drug-addicted bad guy. Immortal Beloved. Another great movie. Let's see. Basquiat. Fifth Element. He plays the bad guy. Air Force One. He plays a good character in that. I don't remember Lost in Space. Let's see, what's another movie? I'm not gonna. Oh, he plays, a prisoner. Harry Potter. He plays Sirius Black. Right. It's not a huge role, but it's there. Batman Begins. I don't remember him. He plays. Yeah, he plays the captain guy, chief or whatever. And that character isn't very prominent, but he nails it. Book of Eli. Let's see what else. Kung Fu Panda. He plays a character. He is a voice. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. The movie I really like. The movie I wasn't really huge. Anyway, so let's about the Darkest Hour. Mank, right? Which I wasn't a huge fan of. Oppenheimer. So that's me rambling about the things I've seen for a long time. If you're still listening, let me know what you think. If you're listening on YouTube, comment below, or if you want to email in via the website. And what movies did you like that you've watched recently? And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.